Our motion is Millennials do not stand a chance, and here to argue against this motion is Jessica Grose. She writes for Fast Company's Co-Create and is a frequent contributor to Slate and Bloomberg Businessweek, and also author of the novel Sad Desk Salad. Ladies and gentlemen, Jessica Grose.
So, like John said, I call myself an ancient millennial. I was born in 1982, which is the first year of a lot of definitions of millennial. I have a baby and a husband and a mortgage and all those things that Keith worries that millennials will never have. We are the most racially diverse. We are the most educated generation of adults today. We've got the lowest amount of debt in 15 years. And that's, in part because we've seen what's happened to the world and we've decided to pull back on buying frivolous things. Where we have healthy relationships with our parents, reported highest levels of healthiness among all adults today, and we have a deep entrepreneurial spirit, as has been mentioned. So why do our detractors say that we're doomed? They say we're immature, immoral narcissists who want to live in our parents' basement. It's always the basement or maybe the attic. So these stereotypes are based on false media narratives, and I am urging you to vote against the proposition because I'm going to dispel those falsehoods. And my partner David, he's going to tell you about some of the underreported truths about millennials. So let's start with that first myth, that basement myth. So it's true that a greater percentage of millennials live at home than previous generations, but the degree to which that's true has been completely exaggerated. Keith said a third. That's not the numbers I've read. The numbers from Pew are that 15% of millennials live at home compared to 12% of boomers and 13% of Gen X. So, I don't know where they're getting that. And the second part of the myth is that it's necessarily a bad thing. Half of the millennials who live at home are in college. And so I think it's better for them to be living with their parents while they get an education than to be wasting money they don't have on dorms and apartments. So the second part of the myth is that the people who aren't in college are just sponging and they're playing video games all day. So I have two examples here. One is Lena Dunham, because you cannot have a debate about millennials without mentioning Lena Dunham. She is the creator of HBO's Girls, if you don't know who she is. She lived at home after graduating from college to make her first feature film, which went to South by Southwest and led directly to her being the creator, star, and writer of her own HBO show, which is the most zeitgeisty show in generations. So maybe you think Dunham is privileged. She's not a good example. So how about Sophia Amoruso? She was making $13 an hour. She was a community college dropout when she was living with a family member in their cottage. She started an online business selling vintage clothing on eBay. That online business has turned into a multi-million-dollar organization called Nasty Gal Clothing. She employs 300 people. So I don't think she would have been able to do that if she had to pay rent on some bad apartment. Really having that support allowed her to launch herself into the world. So the second myth is that we're immature, and some of this immaturity is said because we're not buying cars and we're not buying homes like the people in generations before us did. And that's not because we don't have the maturity. It's because we prefer to live sustainably, not just financially sustainably, but environmentally sustainably. We want to live in close communities. We use public transportation, and I think that that's all to the good. With the age of the McMansion and the SUV, the ginormous SUV, that's over, and good riddance to that. So the third myth is that we're immoral, and as Keith mentioned, we're less religious. But if you actually ask millennials why they've left the church or temple that they were raised in, a full third of them say that it's because of their church's values about the LGBT community. So I think that actually shows a huge amount of moral backbone to be able to question what you were raised in and to be able to say that you want to be on the right side of history. So the fourth myth, and it's the most pervasive myth, is that we are narcissists. And what galls me is that it's always the boomers saying this, and they were the original narcissists. I mean, I think they forget that Tom Wolfe called them the me generation in 1976. But So Keith has told you that we have this inflated, over-optimistic sense of the world, but that's not my impression at all. If you went back to 2000, David Brooks wrote an article in The Atlantic called The Organization Kid. It might have been 2001. I was either a freshman or sophomore in college. And that was a much more accurate picture of how we were raised. We were raised to know that we were competing in a global world. Remember, everybody had to learn Japanese in the 80s and 90s because our parents wanted us to compete the same way that kids are learning Mandarin today. And he says, we are more narcissistic because we agree with statements like, I will be a success. Those are just statements, it's just words. And I think action speaks so much stronger than that. As has been said, we volunteer more than any generation. 73% of millennials volunteered for a nonprofit in 2012. And the percentage of college freshmen believing that it's essential or very important to help people in need is the highest level it's been at in 40 years. There are the lowest levels of drug use, teen pregnancy, and youth crime. That speaks louder than any multiple choice test to me. So I'm not going to stand here and say we weren't dealt a bad hand. Like it's been said, we graduated into a recession, the jobs are scarce, and that there are systemic problems in America with poverty and income inequality that plague all generations, not just us. But I think that millennials are uniquely qualified to solve these problems because we're committed to social justice, we're committed to sustainability, and we have this entrepreneurial spirit. So I really urge you to vote against the proposition because we are so far from doomed. We're just getting started.
Thank you, Jessica Grose.